The night I went into labor with my first son, Cooper, now 8.5, and is my PDA son, I saw an owl in downtown Washington, D.C. So today, to kick off Coffee with Casey, I am going to tell a story about the night that I went into labor. Hi, everybody. So before I got pregnant with my son, Cooper, my first son, my husband and I were in Colombia, South America for a year collecting data for my doctoral research on peace, nonviolence, intergenerational trauma, all the things that now actually have a lot to do with our lives as parents of PDA kids. So we had moved to Washington, D.C., and I was writing my dissertation, and my son was working in a town outside of D.C. in Maryland in local government. And we only had one car. We were living in Petworth, for any of you guys who know the D.C. area. My husband had to go to a community engagement meeting with the council members, and I was picking him up at like 11:30 at night. And we were recently moved to Washington, D.C. I was like about to pop, very pregnant, and I was driving the van through D.C. and I got lost. And my phone was dead. And I was trying to find my way to my husband to pick him up. And this was around my due date. And I got lost in this dark neighborhood, and I didn't see like anything but houses. And then I looked up on a light pole, and there was this like enormous owl with these like bright eyes that were reflecting the city lights. And I was like, oh my God, there's an owl in downtown DC. Hi, everybody. So I started following the owl, and I followed the owl out to like a main street where I knew how to get to my husband's work in the little town outside of DC. So that night, like 3 hours after this happened, I went into labor with my PDA son, and our story began. But years later, I have looked up the symbolism and meaning of the owl, and in lots of different cultures, the symbolism is death. And I've come to think of it as like death of self, like death of old self and a new beginning, and identity for me, which has been absolutely true. So I wanted to share that anecdote to kick off our Coffee with Casey. I'm wearing a coffee shirt from my favorite coffee shop in Hyattsville, Maryland, where we lived in DC. So anyways, it's good to see you guys, and we're just going to kick off with any questions or anything you'd like to share. All right, so the first question from Autumn: how can we reassure our child we love her? She tells us probably 25 times a day that nobody loves her or cares about her. We tell her over and over that we love her, but she just tells us that we don't. Okay, so the first thing I would say is, like, as a parent, this is a horrible thing to hear for two reasons. One, because we feel like we're not a good parent, and two, because we're worried about our child. But I want to invite you to take a step back and view that as data of what's going on in her nervous system and potentially equalizing behavior, which is when your child feels a loss of autonomy or equality, subconsciously their nervous system reacts, and so equalizing is what they do to get back to a place of perceived safety. So saying things like that to a safe person, you don't love me, you're never around, correcting what you're doing, where you're sitting, your language, etc., is equalizing behavior, most likely. And then if you argue with it or rationalize, like, hey, we love you, what can we do? They're still perceiving, because of your response, more and more threat. And so they're going to keep saying it, right? It's not necessarily a reflection of what's true. And this can be hard to wrap your mind around as you're like getting to learn how to caregive for a PDA child. But what I would say is, like, when I think it was daughter is saying that, instead of rationalizing and arguing with it or like taking it personally, like take a pause, notice it, and just say like, I'm so sorry you feel that way. Like, or you could even, sometimes what I do is like self-deprecating. Yeah, mommy sometimes isn't the best parent. I really wish I knew how to be a better mom, right? And like, in doing so, you're slightly putting yourself below your child, which can feel very uncomfortable, but it's preempting that threat response from the sensation that you're above them. So that would be like my practical tip, is like, instead of rationally trying to like reassure, focus on your body and like emitting light to your daughter and just like naming and validating it. Don't argue with it. Don't try and convince. And if you can, put yourself a little bit below the child in the way that you respond, and experiment with that and see what shifts. Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm trying to find the next question. How can we help a child enjoy activity they love without having a sensory meltdown as they internalize it as a demand from us? Okay, so when a child is at their threshold of tolerance, which just means like cumulative nervous system activation has built to the point where like it might be too much to do an activity. Okay, there's 2 choice points here. One is like big picture of like, how do we help a child enjoy activities, which is like what we would work on in a 3-month container together, right? Like, how can we lower all the demands and increase autonomy accommodations, change our language and way of being with the child so that we're in all the little micro interactions, lowering nervous system activation, so the child doesn't get to the point where they can't enjoy the activity, right? That's like in accumulation long term. The second part of that question is like in the moment, right? Where they're already at their threshold. Then we have to incorporate accommodations, right? And it would depend on what the activity is. But usually I encourage parents to think creatively, like based on the root cause. And here I see you're saying sensory. The meltdown might actually be caused from either a combination of too much stimulation, but also the root cause of perceived lack of choice and freedom and equality to what's around them, right? So like, let's say if they're having a meltdown because, I don't know, they're at a trampoline park and you might be assuming like, oh, it's too loud here, they need headphones, but they're rejecting the headphones. It might actually be that they need more nervous system scaffolding from you to bounce with them instead of expecting them to do it independently, or allowing them more autonomy in the way that they move through like the birthday party. I'm just coming up with an example, but that's like a little lens shift I would encourage you to think about. I see a question that's a little bit outside of the scope. Hi, Casey. I'm joining from South Africa. Wonderful. So happy to hear from you. The sacred pause. We've made so much progress since finding in the past 2 months. My son is 10 and we really struggled to get help here in France. Yes, interestingly, I've worked with a family in a program who's French and lives in South Africa. So it like just combined the two people that I saw comments from. Welcome. I wish I spoke French. I speak Spanish. My 9-year-old said he's tired of having a family because we're always telling him what to do and it's so annoying. Yeah, sounds like an expression of like, I need more autonomy and choice and to feel equal to or above, which is very hard when you're operating in a family system with siblings, potentially pets, other people. So I'm just naming and validating that sounds right on par. He said he's only a gamer and nothing else matters. Yeah, and that, I see your emojis and like, I get that we have a lot of connotations around like, like just being on video games forever and, our kids just watch other Minecraft YouTubers and they're not doing anything productive and like, how are they going to live in their future? But I would say like, trying to like take a step back and sort of lean into the fact that that's his special interest or monotropic focus at this stage, and like sort of relax into it a little bit, because often, you know, we're in the fear brain of like, if I lean into the fact that they're a gamer now and totally accept that, then they're never going to do anything else and or be independent. And that's like really future tripping rather than just being like, okay, like you're a gamer, great, and leaning into it. And that's like sort of where the shifts can come. Suggestions for school. Private school is very expensive. Public school has issues. Homeschool is not possible. Yeah, so part of what I do with parents is help them operate within constraints. And I can't change constraints, right? So we have to recognize what we can't change. Like, so what you're saying to me is like, none of these options work. Can you solve that problem? I'm not saying like you're asking me to solve it, but I think like if we were coaching together, we would have to like dig a little deeper and be like, we have to identify like what we can do, right? So like maybe the public school has issues, private school isn't possible, homeschool won't work. So we hone in on the public school and potentially like focusing on how we can be more strategic in our advocacy and communication, because we have to operate within the constraints that exist for each of our families. So if you haven't checked it out already, I might recommend the To School or Not to School Masterclass, which has like some PDF handouts to help you with that. Hi, Tia. Mine is a gamer too. Very cool. Oh, I'm glad it gives you hope. What can I tell the teacher how to work with my PDA child? Just a few sentences to explain here better. Okay, so one of the things I suggest to parents is to be strategic and in our language and our communication and understand the audience. So often parents, and I understand this, I know this because I spent a couple years doing this myself and failed. So there's no judgment in anything I'm saying. Like a lot of what I'm saying comes from like my own failures and trial and error and like realizing like, oh, this doesn't work. But I see this pattern in other parents where we like come to teachers, therapists, pediatricians, and we're like trying to explain PDA, right? We're like, this is what it is, and this is what happens, and we try and convince, right? Instead of just naming exactly what it is, and you can just use one sentence. Like my child has potentially like an ADHD diagnosis and a nervous system disability. Or my child, and if we need to, and this is very controversial, but I try and bridge communication of like, my child is high functioning autistic, but also has a nervous system disability. So we use trauma-informed approaches, or anxiety, severe anxiety-based approaches of accommodation. And then we focus on specific requests rather than convincing about a neurotype, right? So like, pick something specific, like, can I make a request? When the class is in circle time, would it be possible for my son to have a sensory break over in the corner, even though it's not for sensory, it's for autonomy, but they understand sensory breaks better because, he goes into fight or flight, right? So we need to use language that they understand. And when we get too into PDA, like our activism or advocacy has to be a little bit different than our strategic approach to getting our kids exactly what they need practically, because you can't really advocate or move the ball forward on the bigger picture unless your family's stable. That's my perspective. I hope that was helpful. How long did you train your service dog? So we did not train our service dog. We had it trained for us through a company. Yeah. So the dog was trained for like a year and a half. My daughter's super smart and loving, but has zero life skills. Is 10 years old, and we still bring her food for her every meal. Is this normal? Yeah, I bring food to my son every meal as well. How do we get more independence out of her? Okay, so the first thing is to remember that PDA is a nervous system disability, and so the degree to which we need to accommodate depends on the child and where they are in their nervous system cycle of burnout, recovery and new equilibrium as a family. But like, for example, if your child's in school and going to school and having all these perceived losses of autonomy and showing up and doing the work, when they come home, they're going to need more intensive accommodations in order to bring down that overall nervous system accommodation or cumulative nervous system activation, which is like how I view it. It's like my son goes to school and like participates in a lot of the Montessori school, and so we need to offset that by more intensively accommodating him and bringing him food on the couch. And it fluctuates, right? But if he weren't in school, like if we were unschooling, then we would probably need to do that less, and we could push more on the independence of like getting his own food. However, in our family, we have prioritized school because it's something he wants to access. Right? And so we have to like get out of the mindset of like, how can I make this child not have a disability? That's not to say that they wouldn't have any independence. It's just to say like, we need to see it clearly in the big picture of overall nervous system accommodation and understanding that like they will need more support. Okay, thank you. I don't know why I get so triggered and anxious. Probably because, like everyone else on this call, Nicole, you have a sensitive nervous system and probably, maybe, some childhood trauma and or are neurodivergent. Not saying you are, but like I worked with hundreds of families and like almost every parent, one of the two, is anxious and or neurodivergent and or has childhood trauma. So like, of course you're triggered and anxious. Like I am too. It's fine. Welcome. You're in the right place. I mean, that's why I use hashtags of like anxious mom, because I'm like, these are the moms who have PDA kids. And like, yes, we're anxious because of the caregiving responsibility, but it's also genetic. So like it all relates to each other. Yes, you're in the right place. No judgment. Nonverbal 5-year-old knows how to use an AAC device, but sees it as a demand, even though we model without expectations. Any tips? He doesn't understand that by using ACC, he can have more control. Okay, so like, let's interrogate what you mean by control and think about it as like, yes, on the surface, AAC would make it more available to him to communicate, but if he doesn't want to communicate or perceives your expectation that he does, like that energetic perception is enough to set off the threat response. So as hard as this is to like, on an energetic and profound level, let go of his like pushing him or expecting him to use it, and then he will come to it if and when he wants to, right? And I know that that's like a super unsatisfying response, but I hope that that like shifts something in your brain. Okay, mine loves watching others on games, doesn't game himself. I can't get my head around it. Yes, let me help you. Okay, so remember there's like this profound and defining paradox that can seem extremely confusing when we first come to PDA, because in the name of PDA, it's pathological demand avoidance, right? So we're like, okay, let's take away the demands. Let's lower the demands. It should solve things. And this is why I define PDA as a nervous system disability, because if we look at that, we can understand this paradox of like, we're giving them all this autonomy, independence, choice. Why don't they want to go do things? Why do I have to do things for them? Or like, if they're free to have independence and take control, why are they so passively engaging in life or needing so much scaffolding and help from me or just watching someone else do something? Because it seems to counter that like need for autonomy and independence. Both are related to the nervous system. One is like every time the brain perceives a loss of autonomy or equality, it registers in the body as like, I'm going to die, nervous system, right? So at the same time, they need independence and like want to be able to watch gamers if they want and when they want, as much as they want. They also have this constant experience of nervous system dysregulation and threat, which brings up fear and avoidance, right? And needing to not necessarily engage in things, right? They're both related to the threat response. And so you see passivity where you wouldn't expect it because of how we're phrasing PDA, right? Also like pervasive drive for autonomy. If they want autonomy, why won't they do anything? But they're both related to like constantly having this root of not feeling safe in their bodies. You're welcome. The requests you describe make it actionable in the moment for someone who doesn't have a background. Yeah, exactly what I'm trying to get across. Because also, like, we're getting into, like, people, we're back to the teacher's question of, like, their entire training and education and identity. And, like, if we come in and we're like, hey, everything you know is wrong, by the way, it, like, people freak out and their ego gets into it and they shut down. And we need to, like, bridge in order to get our kids what we need. Yeah. Do you split up your kids a lot on vacation and weekends? Always. Can you explain your reasoning for that? How do you decide when to split them up? Thanks. Okay, so everything that I coach families through is a cost benefit. So what you decide in your family is different than what I might decide. And that's why, like, there's no right or wrong way to do this. But you know, in terms of the family system, the cost of keeping all four of us together is too high on my nervous system, my relationship with my husband, and my younger son's psychological and physical well-being. Whereas, you know, and the benefit would be like, I get to spend more time with my husband, but actually it's unpleasant because I can't talk to him. And really it's just attached to like my conditioning around what a nuclear family wants. So like the real benefit is actually like much less than the benefit of splitting them, which is like in our recent vacation. And granted, like I understand I have more finances than some of you. This takes, you know, financial resources. But what we did over our spring break was like my husband took my older son up to northern Michigan. They drove 6 hours and they did everything that my son wanted to do, totally led by him and his nervous system, which is dopamine heavy, right? They went dog sledding. They went like tubing through mountains. They went skiing every day. They went hiking. They went fishing, right? And my 4-year-old cannot do any of those things, right? So if I had brought him, he would have been not only like he would have been equalizing and fighting and constantly berating my 4-year-old. We also would have had to compromise on what my PDA son wanted to do, which would have led to lots of meltdowns, right? Which just means we're miserable, all of us. So what I did was I did exactly what my 4-year-old wanted to do, which was like ride a train, because he's so into trains, right? It's like from the moment he could like engage with toys, trains, trucks. So we were like, let's take the train to Chicago and stay with a dear friend of mine. And so I got to see a dear friend. I got to go to Chicago on the train. We had a blast together. And my nervous system could relax because I could hang out with a friend and be with my son and do his special interests, but a little bit more flexibility for me to engage in things I like being with my friend and like going to see, you know, we took the train into Chicago and we like saw Millennial Park and the Institute of Art. We just went in the kids area, but there's a little bit more flexibility for me not to entirely follow his lead, whereas with my PDA son, we need to. So yeah, we just split them up. And I know some families are single families and it doesn't work for everyone, but like this is the cost benefit that we've come to that has really, you know, after I got through the grief and loss of like what I thought I needed as a family, it's been really good, right? Like we had a great spring break. It just doesn't look like typical families. Yeah, Nicole. Yeah, a lot of the parents on here and who I work with are internalized PDA individuals who may be undiagnosed. So it's like part of, if we're coaching, like part of what we work together in is the identity doula aspect of my work, which doesn't come across as much on my Instagram. Okay. My son bedwets. He is 11 and has a school residential coming up. He won't let me speak with his teachers about it, and we can't seem to address it. I believe it's linked to PDA. What do I do? Okay, what do you do is a question I can't answer on an Instagram live without knowing any context or anything. Also, I don't tell parents what to do. I just give them ideas and like coach them through cost-benefit decisions. What I will say to you, which I hope is like a micro transformation for you, which is really how all change happens and why I can't answer how do I do this questions. We have to work stepwise. The first thing I want you to tune into is like basic needs struggles, and this one falls in toileting. That's an outcome of cumulative nervous system activation. So when you more fully accommodate and make decisions to bring down your child's nervous system activation, they will likely stop wetting the bed. I know that's an unsatisfying answer, but like it's causally linked, even though often we take the problem with like sleep or toileting or eating and look at it in isolation. But I look at it as an outcome. And that, like, for those of you who haven't taken the accommodation workshop intensive, I'm going to do that in May. We're going to like do a whole workshop around questions exactly like this. Yeah. All right, you guys. That was a lot of questions. I see. Hello. There was a question about coaching. So I am like full for the next 6 to 8 months, but if you are interested, you can reach out to my admin at Journey at Peace Parents, and she can give you a list of other coaches. All right, guys, it was fun to have coffee or water with you, whatever you brought. I hope you guys have a good rest of your Tuesday. All right, bye.